Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
On that note, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
I'm that Matt kid. What's up?
And I'm a snugger for fun.
Oh my god.
See, it just sounds so wrong. Oh, and today we're here to discuss a topic that Sir Matthew came up with. You gotta change your username now. What are we gonna talk about today?
This one's kind of a weird one, but I kind of wanted to talk about, like, magic in fiction, and I kind of wanted to nail down on, like, systems of magic, and how, like, when you look at different things, magic is presented in different ways, and sometimes it's very vague and it's very open, and sometimes it's very, you know, extremely specific. Like, for example, like, if you read Conan stories, magic is described almost in terms of cosmic horror, where it is nearly as dangerous to the user as it is to whoever they're targeting, and even people who are really fucking good at magic honestly kind of don't know what they're doing. Versus, like, shit like Full Metal Alchemist, where the magic is a fucking science, and the whole, like, every minutia of how the magic works is important. But I just think that's kind of interesting, and how there are different sort of systems of magic, and the way they're described differently depending on where the story, how the story needs to use them. I thought we could maybe talk about it and talk about our preferences, and see if we could. I really don't know where we would come down on the issue of fictional magic. I just thought it was interesting.
No, I mean, it is. I'm excited because this, like, necessitates talking about Harry Potter, so I'm just here for Alfie's, like, ugh.
Does it actually necessitate Harry Potter?
Yes, it's one of the most popular fictional magical worlds. Alfie, you gotta talk about it.
I don't have to say a thing.
It is true.
If I start just praising Harry Potter, Alfie will either die painfully as he, like, attempts to hold back his words and rage, or he will say something about Harry Potter. One of those two will happen, and I'll be satisfied in either result.
Well, I tell you, like, the thing that got me thinking about this, it was kind of a combination of things. I was talking with my D&D group about how we might try doing it's called Low Fantasy Gaming. It's like an indie tabletop RPG system that's based off of earlier editions of D&D, like D&D 3, like 3rd Ed or 3.5. And the whole point of it is that it's got this dark and dangerous magic system where every time a magic user casts a spell, they have to roll a fucking D100, and depending on what the D100 lands on, it might just go off fine, or the spell might go off fine, but also some horrible side effect will happen. And that just kind of got me thinking, and then at the risk of introducing this, because we could talk about this forever, I then had a conversation with somebody about the differences in the way the Force was presented between the prequels and, like, the sequels and the original trilogy, and how in one aspect you have something that's very spiritual, almost vague, and then on the other aspect you have something that's, like, down to the microscopic organisms in your blood, and just how these things, to me, don't always jive together. So yeah, it's a broad topic, but we don't necessarily have to get into Harry Potter.
I think it's kind of required because
Star Wars instead.
The interesting thing about Harry Potter's magic system is the fact that it is, like, the laziest yet most open, and I think that is what, like, is responsible for 90% of the love of the franchise. because like you have like fucking Gandalf, who the way magic works in the Lord of the Rings franchise, it takes like so much fucking work to do just the most basic shit, and like so much know-how and so much raw power, to the point where like it's so funny when you talk about it, like first year Harry Potter versus Gandalf battles, like Harry Potter fucking stomps, because the magic system in Harry Potter is basically you have to know how the word works, you have to like intend somewhat on what you're doing, and you have to get like a good arm motion, and those are the only requirements. So it's really funny like how low the bar is for Harry Potter's magic system, and I think that's what makes it so attractive, because like magic's so fucking OP and just everything else, and so to take a whole world and have it revolve on magic, that like the more skilled you are, the better you are, but like it's got such an easy in that like fucking kids can do it, I think just has a really like, I think that is one of the most attractive things about the world. But it's really funny to like hear people, because I've heard some of these conversations before, been part of some of these conversations too, hear people who are like really into, you know, the like minutia of world building, especially in fantasy, who just despise Harry Potter because of how easy its magic system is, yet how OP it becomes by comparison. It's really amusing.
It's like a fucking easy to learn, difficult to master type shit.
Yeah.
As opposed to where it's just, as opposed to like fucking Lord of the Rings, where it's difficult to learn and difficult to master, and it's just all around awful.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting though, because like Harry Potter kind of treats it like magic just exists, like it's just a thing, and it happens, and there you go, it's magic. There you can do it, and it works exactly like you'd think it would work. There's spells that you have to wave your wand, and there's like fucking cauldrons. But then you get to the shit that's like, okay, magic exists, but it's actually just like a really advanced form of science that people don't understand. That's like the fucking like MCU kind of straddles that line of like, sometimes it appears to just be straight up magic, and then other times it's just like, well, you see, we're just technologically advanced in a way that you perceive as magic. And that sometimes kind of falls apart for me. This is a shitty example, but like the 2010 Sorcerer's Apprentice movie with Nicolas Cage. Did anyone ever see that?
No.
Oh my god. So Disney made the Sorcerer's Apprentice with Nicolas Cage as the sorcerer, and Alfred Molina is one of the bad guys, I think. And they have to fight Alfred Molina and Morgan Le Fay. And so he's got this kid who's like a science student of some kind, and so that kid ends up being the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And so like they explain that they're like, oh well, you know, yes, it's magic, but it's actually all super advanced physics, because you're able to like see the molecules in the air, and you're able to like split molecules on a microscopic level, which is what creates fire spells. And I'm just like, when does anyone ever want it to be that and not just be fucking magic?
I think it's just this, particularly around like that 2010 era, is you kind of still off the heels of Dark Knight, where, you know, Nolan took the whole thing of like the big fantastical kind of over the top stuff and like made it, you know, semi-realistic. Like realism was a big thing for the Nolan films. And so much stuff tried to copy that and move forward in order to make their fantasticism more palatable. And I really think that it does go back to that. And it's, I don't know, it's interesting. It's fine to do, I guess. It feels like, I guess I don't mind that more when it happens like in a sci-fi property. Because like, sure. I'm rewatching Doctor Who now, in series 3, and there's an episode with fucking Shakespeare, and like 3 witches show up, and they're they're like casting spells and they've been drawn to Earth because Shakespeare's inventing new words and words have power. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's all like actual magic systems. And then to make it work, you have to like have the Doctor go on like a whole thing about how, well, words do have power in like a very specific scientific way, and like he explains it in his way, and he uses magic basically in his way, in the sciencey way. But then, like, after the one scene where he uses it and establishes there's some kind of scientific explanation behind it, the rest of the episode's just fucking magic. Like, there's really no way around it. And so I mind it less when it's in things like Doctor Who or Star Trek or whatever sci-fi property. But when you have stuff where it's supposed to be a world of shared things like the MCU, I find it really dissatisfying when, like, Thor in the first movie is like, magic and science are the same thing to me, and like, they go out of their way in that movie, because that's 2011, to like, try to show, oh no, it's all just really advanced technology. And then you fast forward to, like, Doctor Strange, and it's just not, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just exactly that. Like, at the time that Thor was made, we were still kind of in that, and the MCU was still like, it was still testing itself. It had yet to prove itself to be what it is now. Now you fast forward to, 2017, 2018, whatever, and it's just like, yeah, fuck it, it's magic, who cares? And like I don't know if there was like a hesitancy to just approach it that way from the beginning. And again, I'm not against doing that on principle. And even with, I mean, I just, maybe in the Thor comics it is an advanced science. I don't know. It's just that contradiction is kind of interesting in a world where all those things coexist.
Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know, I don't like that because I think it makes worlds feel small. You know, like, if everything has to be science, then it's not as cool to see, like, fucking, Batman and Zatanna deal with something together. You know, if it's just, like, I don't mind it when, like, the sciencey characters think that way. It's like, oh no, she's not really using magic. It's just some kind of force that's controlled through means I don't understand, but there is a explanation for it. I just don't fully grasp it yet. And I just like when it's just like, no, you're right, but it's actually magic. The force that you're talking about is the magical forces of creation, and my way of controlling it is through tempered means. Like, you're correct. It's still not science. I don't know. I find it more interesting to just kind of own it like that. Alfie, you've been too quiet. Did you fucking choke on your tongue trying to hold back talking about Harry Potter?
No, you two are just making excellent points. My thing about that.
You're thinking about Harry Potter?
No, not that. Because I don't need to put any thought to that. The basic example that I give of like how I changed my view on like magic and systems and kind of how I view everything through like a fictional lens, just like completely, is from one specific comic, and that's by Al Ewing, Loki, Agent of Asgard. The very first issue, or the very first page, effectively, is basically Loki's just like, okay, here's what magic actually is. And they just go into, like, on its basic level, magic is taking a thought and making it real. It is making a lie so good that the universe, for just a moment, makes it real. It's telling a story. And then from there, everything else. And to me, that moment has completely recontextualized every single time magic is brought up in stories or fiction or anything. Is it, to me, and again, whether this is the intent of the author or not, I don't really give a shit because my idea is cooler. Magic is the closest you can get to the pen on the page being kind of in its most purest form. in its most, like, when we talk about magic and the concept of magic and go back in like history and what it is used for, it is just storytelling. It is just sitting down, it is writing, it is telling lies and telling them so good though that you can believe they're real. And when we do that to things and powers and characters who can't do that, in my mind, when I see Gandalf and he has to struggle to shit, it's like, okay, he's not a very good storyteller. He's not a good writer because he can't make you believe it, truthfully.
So ipso facto, when you see Harry Potter, it's suddenly the greatest story ever?
No, because Harry Potter is the worst offender of that. They've got shit magic. They're the worst. They're the most lame. At least Gandalf's doing like fucking like Lovecraftian, fucking like larger than life thematic, like the Sauron will corrupt the sword. Like at least that's got some shit going on. Harry Potter is literally just bang, bang, zappy, zap. It's fucking bitch. It's bitch babe. It's losers.
Okay, finally.
Oh, I turned into I could talk to snake.
Yay!
Anyway,
I was waiting for this. Thank you.
Moving on from that. Anyway, but like my point of that is like when you talk at things which like you brought up of like Doctor Who example, like trying to justify like, oh, this is actually advanced science. I always view it the other way. Is science in these supernatural things is just magic that gets to wear a more dignified face. Like the Doctor is a wizard in a magic box who has a magic wand. Like that's what he is.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is no science behind any of that. And I like that on a character level, he maybe knows that, but he doesn't like to admit that, so he makes not the reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. Like, and that's cool, that's awesome, let it happen, but that's what makes me is whenever a character says, oh, this magical thing has a scientific explanation, no, it doesn't. You're lying, but you're telling a good lie, and it works with the narrative of the fiction. So that's how I always view it, and that's why whenever that happens, like in the 4 movies and stuff, doesn't bother me because I think it makes sense from a character standpoint, and even again if it's against the authorial intent, how I view magic and its relation to how we tell stories is kind of on like a primal craft level of just that is when we talk about magic and magic tricks, it is the most purest form of storytelling a human being can do when you just get down that. Like, turn this into a frog is a story. Like, it is just a word, like you're saying a magic phrase, like a wand or whatever, you're telling something and then making it happen. Like, every magician in comics is a writer, and some are just better at it than others. But like Zatanna's so fucking Chadley, she writes backwards. Like it's just fucking. It's just that level for me. So in terms of what disappoints me with magic and things is when it's not necessarily how it's done or what rules are in, because to me that's all just window dressing. That's like flavor text. That's like just you're going through a world and these are like your trivia things. Like I don't actually take it seriously or anything because it's just whatever, but it's neat and it makes these universes different from each other. Like it gives them their identity, so that's fine. What annoys me is when it is more just uncreative about it, when it is just like you have an excuse here with magic to literally do anything, so I'm going to be a little bit more harsh on you when you choose to do the most boring thing. Mm-hmm. So that's my kind of thing on things, is I don't have a lot of rules, but I kind of have one primal cardinal rule, and if you break that, then I'm not going to like you, and I'm just kind of ignore you, because it's not like I'm running out of things that have cool magical characters. I can read some fucking Doctor Strange Ditko comics, and he's fighting the fucking Dormammu in the unknown dimension with the hoary hosts of Hogarth. I'm like, all right, I'm here. Let's go. Steve Ditko, you're having a drug trip, and this is absolutely insanity. Let's watch it on the page. Like, I can get that fix in normal places, and if you're not bringing stuff to that level, it doesn't have to be, but if you're not being creative even about like a limited set. So like an example I'll give is JoJo, right? So like JoJo and the author Hiriko Araki has probably the most intelligent author I've ever met in terms of taking something that is seemingly, like if this was like a pure magic spell, it's not actually magic, but might as well be, but if it was a magic spell, it would be like the most specific, useless, this has no practical application whatsoever, and then making that a threat and making that the most deadly threat you've ever saw in your life, and how could this possibly be beaten? That level of stuff, if you're going to work with like more limited magicians and like more limited magic sets, I like when they do that. I like when you, all right, work with the constraints, let's get creative with it. How do they make the best with what they can do? Rather than just, we're limited magicians and we're not creative about it and we're just going to just go through the motions kind of thing, because then I just go to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, like, has there ever been a moment where a character who is shown to be able to use magic has been able to pull magic out of their ass, and it feels unsatisfying because you as a reader, like when Batman in the 60s show is able to just pull out like shark repellent, like that's obviously a gag in that show. But do you think that magic in a more seriously told story needs more heavily defined rules? Otherwise, the author could just pull shit out of their ass to get their characters out of whatever? Or does that... I'm just kind of curious, because I'm struggling to think of an example of that.
No,
I
think you're onto something. I think there is an extent to which it's not that it necessarily needs to have rules, but like what you're talking about is something that can and does happen, and it just feels very unsatisfying, even if it's like completely laudable by the quote unquote rules of that universe, you know? Like, I guess, I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's something just more direct where like, oh, well, I just did this, kind of thing. You know, it just... Nothing... Yeah, it's hard to think of an example of it, but I feel like I've seen it where just... Especially because I guess what you're getting at there is when you have character under threat and then they just pull something random out and it saves the day, but it's like not set up or not paid off, and there's no like... There's no stakes to it. Mm-hmm. It can feel wholly dissatisfying because it's like something was just invented for that specific situation. It's like the Misery situation. If you remember, like, fucking Annie's reason for insanity in Misery is she was really into like the action serials that would play before the movies, and there was one where like the hero's tied up in a car that's going over a cliff, and you see the car go over the cliff and crash, and you saw right before the car went over the cliff that the guy was stuck inside the car and he couldn't get to the door, and the car crashed and burned and no one was alive, and she goes back to the theater the next week wondering what could have happened, and then it turns out like they didn't really think of anything, so they just had him like get out of the door and roll out of the car on the other side before it went over the cliff. But she's like, but you could see that he didn't get out of the car in the last one, and you saw when the car crashed that all the doors were closed, so they lied. They're liars. They're dirty birdies. Like, you could just... But like, legit though, that is like incredibly infuriating as a viewer, as an audience member, because then you feel cheated. You feel like your investment didn't matter because... Of course writers make everything up, right? But like, you have to make stuff up in a way that is logical enough to follow, in a way that makes sense, and most importantly, hopefully, in a way that is satisfying at the very least at the moment, if not later on. And so doing a magic spell that just solves the problem is a real problem. Funny enough to keep talking about Doctor Who, because you're 100% right, Alfie. He is a wizard with a magic wand. I really like that, like, Russell T Davies, when he became showrunner, like, fucking overpowered the sonic screwdriver to hell and back. But he made one rule, and it was, okay, the sonic screwdriver can do pretty much anything you need it to do in an episode, except solve the problem of the episode. I really like that rule. It's so perfect. Because like, you still put him in a threatening situation, but he can't just like wave the sonic screwdriver at the problem in and of itself to magically fix it. It's just a nice little conceit that can solve all the little like questions, or, well, how are they going to get out of this very specific situation? And then it's funny that, like, that goes and goes and goes throughout New Who until you get to the fucking, like, 50th anniversary special, and literally Moffat's ultimate breaking of that rule solves the entire fucking Time War.
Pretty good. For me, on my end of kind of the root of what you're saying, Matt, is like it goes back to, again, like, thinking of magic as just purest expression of storytelling out of the writer. So how that comes to me is, like, making that moment satisfying isn't what the spell is itself. Like, it could, like, Ian, you brought up the example of just, like, solves everything and there's no consequences. You can do that. Like, what it was up to you as the writer, as the magician, I should say, is to make that feel true, is to make this lie feel real, to make you be invested and not take you out of it, and not to not show the man behind the curtain, right? Like, when you're in a magic show and the magician slips up, it ruins the magic show. You don't mind after you've seen it and they explain it afterwards, but you want to be tricked in that moment, and that's what the storyteller and the character in that moment should be doing. So say you are in a situation where it's absolutely impossible odds, and you want to end your story, so you don't want to deal with consequences after the fact. There is no sequel. This is the thing. So you just make the main character uses their fucking wizard thing, and they maybe even do it with no effort whatsoever, and create a magic spell that completely solves the problem and takes them back to the thing. All right. So how do you do that without making that feel like the most abrupt, awful ending in the world? Well, it's hard, but it's not impossible, because, okay, is that the resolution of this character's journey? Is that reward for the previous struggles they've been up to? Is that a gag if your story is just a comedy and it's just and it ends on an anticlimax? Like, these are things you can use to make that work as a storyteller. So I'm not necessarily, my focus isn't on the moment where that happens. My focus is, like, have you done the setup to make that moment happen? And it doesn't necessarily have to even be setting up the spell itself. The spell could literally come out of nowhere, but you have to do the extra work as a result of that to make that work. And it can be done. It really can.
Well, is that not, like, literally what all of DBZ is? Like, fucking,
I mean,
11th hour,
kinda.
you cannot fucking beat Frieza, but you go Super Saiyan, which we've never seen before. We've only heard it, like, hinted at.
Yeah, but, like, it's the hinting that's the setup, right? Like,
well, yeah, but like, he pulls Super Saiyan out of his ass and then is able to defeat him, and you don't bat an eye at it, not necessarily because of the setup, I would say, but because, like, it comes from a character place. And, like,
and even then, I think it is just, that's a sense of, it's cool as fuck, so you want to believe in it. Like, that's also right. Kind of that's also the thing, right? Like, but that is true with writing, is if you, depending on the story, of course, but even really, like, even the most, like, hoity-toity, like, art or film, if something is cool as balls, like the fucking Christopher Nolan movies are just filled with, like, hype moments, and like that's just, no matter how auteur you get, like, there's always going to be, like, the knowledge of what gets humans just fucking buzzed is kind of your greatest asset. Because, so Dragon Ball as well is an example of that, where the magic system Ki, even though there is, like, a separate magic, but Ki itself is magic fire blast and stuff, if you really just look at it. The limitations of that are none. You can do whatever the fuck, like, literally Goku can do anything. If Toriyama wanted to, like, he can read minds, he can teleport instantaneously across the universe, he can sense over people's living beings, he can teleport to the afterlife, he can grow infinitely stronger, he can heal people, he can fly, like, anything the story required to, he can be justified to using, even if it is the same as a previously displayed magic ability. And the reason why that is because Toriyama and other authors, because I don't just want to suck off Dragon Ball all the time, know how to make that moment hit. They know when to do it. They know how to execute on the page turn or the music, and everything comes together, and you just get this thing which just, you're not, even if there are seams, the seams don't matter. Like, the magic show, if you really look away from the dancing girls and the flashing lights and the music, and you're really concentrated, you could probably figure out what's going on. But you don't want to because you're swept up in the excitement of the thing, and you want it to be like, yes, Goku, we were rooting for you. You do this, or yes, fucking Doctor Strange, you've made a time loop out of nothing to stop Dormammu. Like, all these kind of things are part of you believing in the fiction and being successfully tricked by the magic.
To be fair, I mean, like, Ian's absolutely right that, like, I don't know that narratively that Super Saiyan moment hits as hard if there's not some level of setup for it.
Of course, but like,
same thing with the time loop. With, you know, if they don't establish that there is some sort of like time magic.
I think like a good example of this is like if you were to, like their fan base does, take Rick and Morty seriously. You know, like if you were to if you were to pretend that it isn't a comedy, again, like the fans do, and take...
You need to have a degree in theoretical physics to understand the humor. It's very nuanced and subtle.
Yeah, exactly. So like, but like, because that kind of shit, like, it's a gag every time. But like, if you were to take the exact same moments from Rick and Morty, that he just like shows up and he just boop solves the problem with the press of a button or the pull of a trigger or whatever. And it just, like, it's usually, like, a gag and, like, a red herring moment or it kind of goes off in another direction. But if you were to take the comedy out of the scene and just play it straight as, like, okay, and then that was the end of the story, that would feel very dissatisfying because of a lack of setup or anything. I don't know if we're really talking about, like, magic systems and rules anymore, though. I think this has drifted just into fully a conversation about narrative structure and writing and magic as a tool of writing, which is, of course, interesting in and of itself. But I think there is, like, the other side of it, which is the more, like, classically built magic systems where there is, like, clearly thought put into it. And I do see a value in that. I do see a reason why that's done, not only because it's got like a funness to it, but like it's a cool, clever way to kind of create a very immersive world. Like Game of Thrones, I think, is interesting for this because when that series starts, they say it's been like over 100 years since the last dragon died. And magic isn't really a thing anymore. It's like a dying breed, to the point where like there are people around who like don't think magic was a thing anymore, who like don't think dragons were a thing in that world anymore. They think it's just like exaggeration or stories. Like the magic of that world's starting to die. And then as the series goes on, it comes back and it starts to get like really serious and really like scary. I like in I assume there's some degree of this in the books. I don't know how accurately it's represented, but like I like in the second season where Daenerys, the dragon queen, basically is trapped in a warlock's temple, and they've trapped her and her 3 baby dragons, and their reasoning is their magic was dying, but her birthing dragons back into the world has brought magic back, and they're going to use her and the dragons to like draw power. And I just thought that was like, just as a fan, like watching that for the first time, I thought that was such a cool thing, because it's like it's creating a world of like interdependent things where you've got like human beings in and of themselves have nothing to do with magic, but magical creatures, mythological creatures, fuel magic in the world. I thought that was a really cool thing. So like humans have a power because they can kill those creatures, and that kills off magic, and then that kills off the whole system for them. I thought that was just really cool and interesting, like dynamic and system to set up within that world. So it can magic, like magic systems feel like they're their thing, and I think it's fair to say that there are fantasy works with magic systems that are so intricate that the person might as well just have written an RPG game and then written like a novelization to give that RPG world backstory instead of writing the novel. But so like I think it can get to that point sometimes, but then when you have like when you do put thought into a magic system when you're dealing with like a fantasy world, it can lead to some interesting results and implications for the world itself.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, Game of Thrones, the original Star Wars trilogy, and Conan all kind of share this similar sense of magic being sort of, like, awe-inspiring, rare, and vaguely terrifying. I mean, so in Game of Thrones, when the redheaded chick births the black demon spirit that goes and kills
Stannis.
Yeah, Stannis Baratheon.
Spoilers.
That's like season 2. No, it's not. That's like season 4. But like, that shit is like right out of Phoenix on the Sword, which is like the first Conan the Barbarian short story. That's basically what Thoth Amon does with his ring. Like, those two have a magic system that is...
My bad, it was Remy. It was Remy Baratheon.
Oh, it's Remy?
Yeah, because Stannis is the one that fucks the Red Lady.
Oh, Stannis is the one who... Oh, right. So, like... And those two magic systems are kind of cut from the same cloth, in that magic is rare, bizarre, and very scary. And I almost put the original Star Wars trilogy in that same lineup, because when you see Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi using the Force in Episode 4, it's treated as this like just bizarre, strange thing that you've never seen before, and I really like that about it. I really love that in just fiction in general, where your magic system is almost unknowable, and I think that's kind of cool. In Star Wars, obviously, eventually it kind of grounds itself a little bit more. But then you have, like, the flip side of that. You have something like one of my favorite anime magic systems, which is Full Metal Alchemist, which is a series that lives and dies by the rules of its magic system. The whole fucking premise of that show is that its magic system has unchangeable, unyielding laws. And what makes it interesting is when people start trying to break those laws, and like they're after a thing that lets them break those laws. So like I feel like it really just depends on the story that you're kind of telling. Because I used to kind of be on the side of like, well, no, you need to explain your magic system fully so the audience doesn't feel cheated when some bullshit happens. But as I've kind of matured in my opinion of things, I feel like you can have an appreciation for both. I do tend to notice the more really explained and intricate magic systems coming more from like the anime side of things, just on like my personal experience and like JRPGs and stuff like that. Whereas like when I view Western stuff, they tend to just kind of like magic is just a thing and there it is, and they play a little bit more fast and loose with it. That's just what I've noticed, but I could be wrong about that. So I don't know that I have a preference between super fucking intricately explained magic and magic that just sort of is almost nebulously never explained at all. I think it just depends on how you use it.
I don't know. I like it sometimes to be explained, but like I guess it just depends on how far you get into it. Like I really enjoyed Justice League Dark when that the rebirth run of that, because it starts and it's just about like the idea that magic always comes at a price. Is a pretty firm idea within just like magic as a concept. Is you can't just use it without any kind of cost. And the thing Tinian does that's kind of cool, and it's not him. This is like an actual thing that like magic practitioners believe in, is that the users of magic within the DC universe always channel their magic through something else to protect them personally from those costs. So like there's a really cool scene where Zatanna's like a really little girl, and she's running through the woods, and she sees a dead rabbit, and she's like, oh no, and she goes and she picks up the rabbit, and she says, come back to life, but she says it backwards. And her dad comes around the corner and goes, no, 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 and he like grabs the like living rabbit out of her hands. He says, whatever price needs to be paid for this, let me pay it instead. And you just see him like immediately suffering, like coughs up blood because it's just like this horrific price of like bringing something back from the dead has a cost. And so it's established that like Zatanna and Zatara, their backward speak is their way of protecting themselves from that cost. John Constantine has a demon's blood, and that's the barrier that protects them. Mm-hmm. What was it, Alfie?
Yeah, and I think all of that's fun and needed, just in the same way as like you'd set up any like limitations in storytelling or whatever. Mainly though, just so you know what you can break if you want to, because I think that's a very good tool to do as a storyteller, is to say, okay, these are the things that could never be broken, and then break them is like the best twist you could do. Because it's the one thing, like you get them on the side and they're like, yeah, okay, I understand the thing, I'm as smart as the writer. It's like, no, you're not. don't forget, like I think that is a handy tool. You don't need to, but I think that's a good thing to do when setting up rules, is to understand that these are for the audience, not for you. I think that is a thing as a writer that, to me, is the difference between when, like you said before, but like some writers should just really have just been DMs and just write like RPG campaigns, because that's when they are rules for the players. Like that actually do need to, because it's a video game at that point. It needs to be rules to understand and follow so you can play it. But when it comes to a writer, I think the difference is just being like, these are some guidelines, these know you what kind of tone you're getting from the story, these know you what kind of stakes are at play with the story, and these get you into the world and what the characters know and the information. But if you run up to something and you think this would be a really great moment if this happened, but you previously established, well, this can't happen, in my opinion, you should really consider, okay, but is that previous moment worth breaking for the moment of this moment hitting, and can I do that in a way where it doesn't actually break that moment, it then makes that moment feel like ingenious setup, you know, like, oh my god, this writer was planning it from the beginning because they said this and then they broke that, but it was all a twist. Like, you look really smart when you do that. So I think that's a trick to it. And I think what you talked about, Matt, when you brought up like anime power systems, is like Hunter x Hunter is a big example of like its magic system being like fucking, you have theoretical lecture. Like whenever someone, like every time someone does something in that show, they take a minute to just explain it for like 10 minutes straight of like how it happened and what it was and what it transfers to and stuff like that. Death Note is an example of an entire series that just made its entire drama come from the main character being like, all right, I have this book that if I write the name down of anyone, it will kill them, and these are the rules for it. How can I get around those rules for 25 episodes? That's exciting. Like that becomes like exciting to watch. So there's definitely, I don't even really think of it as just two different types of magic systems. I think it's just depending on whatever story that writer's telling, it needs a different one. And sometimes writers can make mistakes where I feel like it wasn't the intention of the prequel trilogy to make the Force feel more like kind of explainable, but that's what fans took away from it. So I feel like that's why, like, I don't think if the midichlorians things became such a big deal, I don't think George Lucas would have then been in Clone Wars like, all right, let's introduce them more as shit. Because I think that is a direct reaction to be like, oh no, they think the Force is magical, is science now. I need to correct them. I don't think that's in the material, because I don't think that is how the prequels portray the Force, but I think that is just sometimes you don't apply the right lesson to what you're trying to get across, and that's just a failing as a writer. Sometimes that happens. I think some looser magic systems might have hit differently if they had previously set up some rules that they then break, as that like hype, like, oh, they've pushed past what is known possible kind of thing. But I don't really view them in mind as two separate things. I think they are just in the same way as moving between what type of, when you do sci-fi, right? Like, how advanced is this civilization? Like, I don't rate my stories on like how differently advanced the sci-fi situation is, you know? Like, it's just whatever's best for that particular story.
You know, you make an interesting point about how effective kind of the breaking of rules can be, and this was kind of an interesting thing because it was so this is like a little anecdote, but like, so when I was in college, or maybe it was just after college, we were playing Pathfinder, which is basically Dungeons and Dragons. It's an offshoot of D&D 3.5. And so my wife Carly was my girlfriend at the time. She was DMing, and there's a spell in Pathfinder called Magic Missile. It's not a particularly powerful spell. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but what makes it useful is that it does not miss. It cannot miss. It only misses if you're firing at something that you don't even know is there. As long as you know that there's an opponent there, if you shoot Magic Missile at it, it hits. That is the rule. And so Carly had introduced this kind of powerful, almost like imp-like demonic creature that we were fighting. And so one of our users fired a magic missile at it, and she said, you shoot the magic missile at it, it goes towards it, and then it flings off, and it doesn't even hit it. It just it just goes almost like someone takes the magic missile and bends it around, and so it doesn't hit. And that was like really cool, because that's as players, you're like, oh shit, like, fuck, like, we're dealing with something powerful if that doesn't even do it. But I remember one of our players got very upset and was like, no, that's against the rules. That's not how that works. And it's one of those things where it's like, the storyteller at the end of the day has the ultimate decision of whether or not these rules apply, because that's the story that they're trying to tell. I just remembered that interesting anecdote because I thought it was kind of relevant to what you
see,
were saying.
in tournament-based D&D games, the rules do matter.
But fucking, like, this was a fun campaign.
Wait,
with,
no, I was joking. Are there actually D&D tournaments?
Well, no.
Okay, thank God.
You just gotta understand that some D&D players take this shit way too seriously.
I know. I get that. I was like, how would a D&D tournament even work?
Well, everyone builds their character, and I could see that. Like, everyone gets to build a level 20 character, and you just fight. Like, I don't know. You could probably make it work. But yeah,
it's like a fighting game tournament, but with even more saltiness.
Exactly. So that was just because that was kind of that whole dissonance just in practice. And I was like, on the one hand, you have someone who's looking at it purely from, well, this is how it works. And then you have another person saying, yeah, I know that's how it works. And that's why me breaking that rule should be scary to you and should, like, tell you something. And I think that dissonance can be found in a lot of places. I think you even get that in the sequel trilogy, where people, like, are unwilling to look at the magic of the Force the way it's being presented in the films. It's like, yes, this is trying to shape and almost not necessarily change, but trying to inform your view of how the Force works. Whereas someone might look at it and be like, well, no, that's not how it works. And it's like there's this disconnect there. Maybe I'm just kind of spinning my wheels, but that I thought of that and thought it was vaguely interesting.
No, I think that's fair. The Star Wars thing is always so funny because, like, it is 100% magic, right? Like, there's really no denying it. But people really act like it's supposed to be this hard sci-fi kind of thing. Hell, even fucking Star Trek, which people, like, tout up as, like, this really hard sci-fi thing, has just absolute bullshit magic in it. Like constantly. Like some of the most popular characters are just magic. But it is funny to look at like Star Wars, and in particular what's done in the sequel trilogy, wherein, you know, it pushed what you could do with the Force. Like it added, not necessarily added powers, it mostly took stuff that already existed and just presented it on screen for the first time.
Right, exactly.
And just tried to do cool and interesting things with the Force, which we hadn't seen, because, like, I mean, that's not even true. Because, like, the prequels introduced things that we hadn't seen. Fucking Luke didn't do a light speed dash in the goddamn original trilogy, but right in episode 1, fucking Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are just like, shoot, what, like, they hit that fucking right trigger just like Sonic. And
dude, they're just they're gone.
Exactly. Tell me that's not a fucking Sonic move. But like, you know, the prequels introduced new Force powers, less so, I think, than the sequel trilogy compared to the original. I think that's fair to say. But like every era of the Star Wars films introduced new powers, but for some reason, people got... Well, I know the reason. But people got really shitty about it in the sequel trilogy. And
I was going to say, we all know.
Yeah, but it's just... I don't know, it's interesting, because it was cool to see, you know, new Force powers, and people act like it was like this very limited, like, hard-locked, no, these are the only things you can do with the Force. That is it. Whereas, like, the whole point of the Force was like, oh no, like, in the ancient times, people destroyed planets with the Force. I'm assuming by just Force grabbing them in the certain parts of the fan base's heads, but I guess not. But like literally, you had Palpatine straight up say, "Oh yes, someone once used the Force to prolong life forever," and yet they died before they could pass on their knowledge. But maybe you and I can learn this together. Fast forward to the sequel trilogy, and fucking Rey and Kylo touch fingers in like a sexually tantalizing scene. And everyone's like, no, this is bullshit. This can't happen. And I'm like, they're both perplexed by it too. They're both legitimately surprised that they're able to do this. They're firmly establishing this isn't some normal, everyday Force use shit. But like, my God.
Well, I mean, it's those things where it's just like, oh well, you know, if Force healing exists now, how the fuck can Rey heal Ben? Why didn't Obi-Wan heal Qui-Gon? And I'm like, it's freaking well.
It's hard.
First of all, maybe one, it's hard. Two, maybe Obi-Wan just didn't know how to fucking do it. Like, she learned that technique presumably from like ancient Jedi texts that have been presumably like lost to time. For a long time. But
Scrolls!
I mean, like, I don't even really want to get into that per se, but yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. It's like we're introducing, or at least showing off, kind of unexplored aspects or different ways that the Force can be used and handled, which is what you would want from sequels. I would think.
No. Have you ever seen those memes of like if Star Wars fans wrote Star Wars?
No.
Oh, there's a great one of like the scene with Yoda and Luke in the swamp and the X-Wing. And Luke's like trying to lift the X-Wing, and like they put a fucking stamina bar above Luke, and he doesn't have enough stamina to do it. And Yoda's like, you fool! I told you, first you must train yourself in the Force to build up your Force stamina in order to give you the power to lift heavier objects. Yeah. And then Yoda lifts this, and his stamina bar is like the whole fucking screen. It's like, see?
His power level.
I know.
That's why I don't like fucking like. What is like one of the first things we're taught about the Force is like, it doesn't fucking matter. You can lift whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
No limits, only in your mind.
Yeah, but then you see people who are like, oh, well, Rey lifted all these boulders super easily while, like, Yoda struggled to lift that thing in the prequels from falling down in Episode 2. And I'm just like, like, I just, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, I'll be on this all day if we get into that, but like, the Force is really interesting as a magic system because it's a magic system that has limits, but those limits are entirely based on that character's like state of mind and like how they approach the Force.
I know. Okay, okay.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I fucking love that about it because like I love that one of the things that Yoda says when like Luke and Obi-Wan are trying to convince him to train him is like, no, he is too old. And it's the same thing that was said about Anakin, is Anakin is too old to train because Anakin was like 9 or 10 or whatever. And then you get to like Clone Wars stuff, and so you see like 9, 10-year-old Anakin and you like 17, 18-year-old Luke, and you're like, okay, like how young do you want them? And then you find out that like the Jedi came and like took babies to come train to be Jedi. And the reason was, and like the implication is because then they don't have those limits built into their heads by living in reality, like by living in quote unquote the real world. It's like, oh, you can't do that. That's impossible. Is like the lesson you learn over and over and over again as a child. But like if you grow up and no one ever says that to you, and you have the like biological capability to tap into this mystical force, then you can conceivably become unstoppable. Like,
what I love about like that balance there, right, is how they set that up, and then they show like how the Jedi fuck it up. Is then you have that exact same system being the ones who are always, without fail, oh, that's impossible. No, there's no way. There's no way that could be. Oh, there's no planet in our archives? That's impossible. We know everything. We've done everything. We're the best. We've sorted out. No, a Sith can't rule the Senate. We'd have said that. No, the Sith can't be back. We'd have said like it's absolutely, even without that system, they had hypocrisy, and that is what the pride is what has got them to limit themselves. And meanwhile, the dark side, Sidious. I've been reading the Darth Plagueis book. I just finished reading it, audiobook style. And they have a really great line in that from Plagueis when he's explaining the dark side, and very much like the Sith version of that, of just like, your power as a Sith will only be limited by how much you want, and what do you want, Palpatine? And he's like, I want everything. Well, then you will be unstoppable. It's awesome like that, and they do a really good like way of showing that kind of thing. And in terms of just magic systems in general, I think that is a really good example, because that's a way where you create a seemingly infinite thing with a mystique that you don't really know much about, and every time you think you know something about the Force, there's always throws a curveball at you that completely makes that wrong. Like, no one really can say what the Force actually is, and I love that. But at the same time, they fleshed it out and give it things where you can grasp it and you can understand how the characters in universe have made different assumptions about it and have different relations to it, and what it is and how it views and how it comes differently to the mind. So it's just like, yeah, I think that's a very good example that other writers can like take to use for other systems of magic and belief, because it comes from a purely character standpoint first, is what it is what this does is purely dictated by this character. Who wins fights in Star Wars is purely depicted by who is mentally winning that battle. It's like the Empire fight is like the biggest example of like the magic between those two battles between Luke and Vader, is because Vader's in complete control of that fight, because Luke doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, both in a text sense, in terms of, yes, he doesn't have training, yes, he does, but in a, Luke doesn't actually know what he's fighting for here. He doesn't actually know the full truth of all of this kind of thing. And that's a really smart way of tying in your magic to your emotions, into making the audience feel it in a different way, rather than if it was just this guy's stronger than this guy and this guy gets stronger than them kind of thing, without any weight to it, without any like feeling to it.
You know, I think we mentioned, like, I think this is an interesting point to say, because I think it does kind of come back to this a little bit, even specifically with the Force, is that how you mentioned, you know, at this point you might as well have just made like a fucking tabletop RPG. And I think there is something to say about, like, you're right in that the Force is very cool as a magic system, the way it's presented, and everything you said, 100%, like, on the money. That's really hard to translate to a video game. And video games are, like, increasingly becoming one of the most consumed mediums that have magical elements and stories to tell and things like that. And so with, like, KOTOR and, like, Jedi Academy and things like that being really popular games where you, like, accrue Force power over time and have to, like, unlock new abilities. You know, no one batted an eye at Force healing when it was in every single video game ever, but now that's in the sequel trilogy, I guess it's bad, whatever. But, like, I think that people experiencing and really falling in love with Star Wars as it is presented in that space has sort of shaped kind of their overall perception of what the Force is and should be, when in reality it's just what the Force actually is and how it behaves is kind of just hard to do in a video game, so they've kind of turned it into,
I mean, they can't even get fucking
rules-based.
lightsabers right, so...
I do want to... Matt, have you ever played Fallen Order?
I have played Fallen Order, yeah, for sure.
What I like, I think that's the best example so far of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really the one, you can only do it the one time because you don't want to repeat the story. But, like, the story is this character has suffered a traumatic event, and so they think that their connection to the Force is damaged. And so the Force powers you use is, like, really just middle of the road shit kind of thing.
Yeah.
But as you get more powerful in the game, you unlock new abilities, it isn't just arbitrary, it is... Your character is realizing that there is nothing wrong with them. They've just suffered a traumatic event and they need to learn how to process and deal with that. Just going to therapy. And as a result of that, the character gets stronger throughout the game. Their connection to the Force gets brought back more because they're letting themselves touch it more. And I think that is a good way of telling it in story and gameplay whatsoever to the thing. I'll bring up Harry Potter. I know, shocking. But what I think will be interesting is this new Harry Potter game that they're bringing out, which is like a create a character type of thing.
Very curious about that.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work with that magic system. And, like, will there be, like, class trees? Will there be different types of wizards and stuff like that? Like, it is a fascinating thing, Matt, when you bring, like, video game mechanics into it, because that's when I think you do have to lean more towards the heavily ruled side of things. Well, that's where, like, RPGs and, like, Final Fantasy and stuff, like, because it is text boxes and stuff that you have to click on, because if you don't know what the spell you're doing does, the player's going to be confused, so you have to explain it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of those things where it's like, if you look at this is, I swear I have a point with this. Like, Harry Potter as a world is one that people have always found it very easy to jump into. Like, there's a reason that so many, like, fan fictions and fan art out there is, what if these characters but in the world of Harry Potter? Because the way that...
What if Superman and Harry Potter are coming to Geeks for Fun?
The way that
That's when I'll write Injustice Superman.
Oh my god. The way that it was written, it makes it easy to, like, just kind of insert characters into whatever fucking house they go into. Mm-hmm. But, like, the thing with Harry Potter is, like, if I'm approaching Harry Potter as a franchise from a video game perspective, my thinking there would be, okay, well, you have, like, Defense Against the Dark Arts, you have, like, your standard, like, obliviates and stupefies and whatever, but you also have, like, potions and herbology and, like, all this other shit. So, like, my treatment of that would almost be like and I have no idea what they're doing, but, like, if I was doing it, it would be like an RPG that's kind of open-ended, where, like, you can spec into different types of magic and then approach the same problem in different ways. Like, if you've built your character for herbology and potions versus straight out damage dealing spells, you might approach a situation differently. And I think that that's kind of interesting, and I always like that in, like, a more gamey take on a magic system, mm-hmm. where you're able to kind of do that. It's actually, I don't mean to circle back for this for too long, but what you were saying about Jedi Fallen Order kind of made me laugh because I was thinking about that. I was like, well, no, I mean that's kind of how it works in the KOTOR games. Like in KOTOR 1, you're not some dude learning the Force for the first time. You are a person who had a very strong connection to the Force that has been wiped from your memory, and you're trying to get it back. And almost like similar situation in KOTOR 2. So what's funny about that is that those games actually go out of their way to provide an in-story reason as to why the Force is kind of behaving like this, and yet that never gets considered. We still just kind of look at it as this is how learning the Force works, but it's really not. Those are just very specific, weird circumstances.
And then there's the Force Unleashed, where it's like...
Well, the Force Unleashed is fucking awesome, and I love it as just I love Force Unleashed for what it is. I would never want it to like be brought into canon, but I'm just like, God, I'm glad this exists because it's so fun to play.
Well, it's just such a button masher with the Force, which is kind of what you'd want to do anyway, you know?
I just enjoy the shit out of it. Just like doing a Force push where you can like Kamehameha like a group of half a dozen stormtroopers and they just go like fucking flying. Like that, based on how the Force works in the universe of Star Wars, that is conceivably something that could happen. But it's treated in a very different way in that game. But I'm glad it exists because it's fun as shit.
The thing that kind of goes to me is like the like Doctor Strange example, right? Or even just like, okay, so just keep it to just the same universe. The difference between a Constantine story and a Doctor Fate story, right? Is they are both magical users in the DC universe, but Constantine is dealing with back alley piss demons, and Doctor Fate is dealing with the Spectre. Like it's just, and like talking to pre-Crisis Darkseid while Crisis is happening, and they're just having like a conversation because like, yeah, that's whatever. Anyway, me and you, we're the real shit. Like it's that level, just a ridiculous level of magic. I don't mind that in stories having that coexist. I do think it fits the medium with Force Unleashed, right? Of being a video game that is trying to. The premise was let's just make you feel it. Let's just turn it up to 11. And Sam Witwer, the voice of Starkiller in that game, is even like, yeah, don't take that literally, because like we just made you to feel that strong as a player. We're not actually doing that. But in my opinion, I think that's like. I don't think that is something that needs to be a hard and fast rule in Star Wars, because like you said before, Ian, of like, or even just any magic system, the limits you put on them can be as arbitrary as you need, and just because one character has this really strong fucking moment doesn't mean suddenly every other thing is needing to be on that level or less, because it can be very specific to that person. I was one person, again, as the resident Rise of Skywalker only person on the earth who likes that movie.
Correct.
I really appreciated that in the last Star Wars movie, they finally just said, fuck it, Palpatine solo. Like, I was about that life. I was here for finally seeing that on screen of just that ridiculous level of Force power. And I think that's good to... They used it at the right time of having that be the literal last stand of the movie where every other one of his plans has failed. So he's just like, all right, fuck it, brute force. Let's just go. Let's just fuck everything around. I've tried everything else. Let's just fucking be a power scale. I like doing that because it makes the Force feel as infinite and unimaginable as you want, where you can have it be as grand as that, but then you can have an equally powerful use of the magic. Again, I don't want to just get to so much in Star Wars, but it is such a good magic system. Yeah. But
it's not magic. The Force isn't magic. I'm waiting for that fucking comment. Comment's gonna be so good.
Like the example I'll use here for like strengths in magic is you can look at like a magician like Darren Brown or Houdini or anyone like that, and like. A powerful magic trick can be something as simple as just this thing you thought was in front of you isn't actually in front of you. Or it could be that to like 5,000 people in like a packed arena, or it could be that on a TV show that convinces everyone. Like, the scale of the thing is still the same act, you know. And so to me, Palpatine doing that giant Force laser blast and destroying like an entire fleet, that's physically impressive. But is that as impressive as Obi-Wan in A New Hope, knowing how this is going to go and sacrificing himself and just disappearing, and the audience doesn't know what the fuck just happened, and we still really don't know what the fuck just happened with that. like that's from the very first time we see, like, in A New Hope, that's really kind of the only visible Force power you ever see is when Obi-Wan dies and just disappears. And I think that is, in my mind, even more
because we don't get the first Force pull until Empire, right?
Yeah.
It's a good point.
So like, that is it. And to me, that's how you can do strength in magic on both the macro and the grand scale. You know, like you can have these Doctor Strange. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Finish your important point, and then let me make a shitpost joke.
No problem. But like, you can have your Doctor Strange battling beams against like a fucking darkness entity, but you can also have something as simple as him winning the day by just what's a good like solid example of that? Because there are like, you know what I mean, right? Where it's just like the small, like it's the master with a pebble will defeat the apprentice with a gun. You know, like it is that just precision of a small trick can sometimes be the key to victory. And I think that is a really good way of like having your cake and eat it too with magic systems.
Oh, for sure. Okay, shitpost time?
Yeah.
Okay, I think my favorite bit of power scaling in the Star Wars universe is in the Force Unleashed downloadable content, where you can like fight Obi-Wan on Tatooine as like Han and everyone are trying to escape. Obi-Wan will like leave the ship and fight you, and it's a boss fight. And like the first stage is you're just fighting like old man Obi, and you kill him, and then you go to like try to get on the ship and murderize everybody. And then fucking Ghost Obi-Wan shows up, and you have to have a lightsaber duel with Ghost Obi-Wan.
What? Yeah, amazing. I haven't played the DLC for that. That sounds awesome.
It's so fucking dumb. I love it so much.
You kill him twice.
It's just like, I shall become more powerful than you could possibly... Oh, ow, you're still hitting me with a lightsaber. I don't feel like this should work. This isn't fair.
That sounds awesome. I did not know. I've not played the DLC for that, but that sounds fucking amazing.
It's so funny. It's so... Like the DLC for Force Unleashed is some of the most just like hilarious shit, because it's like on one level it's like, oh, that's so cool, that's a great idea, like it doesn't make any fucking sense, because there's a DLC for the bad ending of Force Unleashed 1 where you get like turned into the Emperor's servant or whatever, where you're sent to Hoth and you kill Luke on Hoth, and he like becomes your apprentice basically. Or not, you kill him, you defeat him, and then he becomes your apprentice. So Luke falls to the dark side. Then they release for Force Unleashed 2 a DLC based off that not continuity, where Leia trains to fulfill the prophecy, and you fight Leia and you still kill Leia, so it's just like the ultimate bad ending. It's so fucking funny.
Amazing.
It's like a whole continuity of bad endings. Like, oh, that's so cool. Leia finally steps up and gets to fulfill... Oh, no, she's... You killed her. And she's not even like a particularly hard boss fight. It's kind of sad, honestly. They should have made her like a harder boss fight, because then it's I don't know, it would have felt more satisfying that like maybe she'd be impossible to beat, and then it would have made sense. But no, they just really double down on having you fucking murderize the shit out of everybody. Oh, it's good stuff. I like it. Anyway.
I need to go back and play that. Sounds fun.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's kind of mean, but it's fun. Anyway, what else? Do we have anything else we want to talk about with magic systems, or do we want to go ahead and wrap up and call it a night? Since I'm just like at the point where I'm talking about the Force Unleashed downloadable content.
Does anyone have like a favorite magic system in fiction? I mean, mine's probably the Force, but
Yeah, I mean the Force. Like if you're gonna count the Force, which you probably should, but I know there are people who will argue you shouldn't, then it's the Force. Outside of that, I don't know. I quite like that DC seems to have like 17 magic systems. I really appreciate that. That there's just like, and Marvel too, that there's not just one magic in either of those universes. There's just like 17 kinds of it's, flavor of the week magic is beautiful.
mm-hmm.
My all-time favorite use of magic in fiction or anything like that is, again, the thing I said before, is Marvel's magic system, specifically how Al Ewing writes it. And he's written like more and more of that corner of Marvel now, so it is kind of, he's like setting like the foundational kind of shit which I like, but specifically like the one that demonstrates it best, which is literally just here's me just having a fucking thesis field day with magic through Loki and storytelling as Agent of Asgard. I think that is just change the way I view everything. So such a good book. But yeah, outside of that, if you're being more kind of right and stuff, it's got to be the Force.
Bending is also pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty neat as well. That's a good one.
Bending? Oh, like from Avatar? Yeah, no. It's not bad.
From Avatar.
Okay. All right.
Ian was just like, "What? You guys can't like bend over?" Like,
no, it's just like it's just such a fucking like. Wait, what? Huh? I'm confused. I'm old. Okay, I just saw Avatar last summer and thought it was all right.
Was it fine in the case of Alfie Taylor?
Yeah, it was fine. It was, kind of started to like Korra, and then Korra kind of turned into torture porn, and then I kind of gave up on it in season 4 because I just got tired of seeing that poor girl get her ass kicked. Like
season 3 is the mountain. After that, you're just kind of downhill.
Yeah, no, I just like it. I legitimately think I have seen literal videos that are just like fetishizing like people getting beat up with less like gratuitous violence toward the main character than the entirety of Legend of Korra, where it's just like there's legitimately a scene where she is just tied down and tortured for like entirely too long.
Oh yeah, Korra gets her ass kicked.
It's just not pleasant, man.
That's fair.
Oh, anyway, yeah, I think that'll do it. All right, whose turn is it? Is it mine? Is it Alfie's? Was it Steve's? Does anyone know?
Knowing our luck, it's probably Steve's, but I don't know.
What was the one we did before this?
That was the Killing Joke. That was mine, so it's not me. Haha.
It's me or Steve.
I mean, I guess I could do the thing where I go like look at the playlist, but that's gonna take a minute.
I'll step in. I'll say.
Hold on. No.
Oh.
You shut your whore mouth. I've already pulled up the playlist. Now let me go through the last 9 years of videos until I find the newest one. All right.
Sad I wasn't on I was kind of sad I couldn't make it for the Killing Joke one. I would have liked to have talked about it.
You could have. You could have made your decision, and you made the wrong one, and you didn't get to be there. Now sit in your bed and lie in it.
Killing Joke is good, except for the parts that are bad. Those parts are bad. Done. That's it.
Okay. We talked about rogues galleries. Was that Steve?
That was me.
No, that was you. Okay. So we're going to have a mystery topic next week, and we're going to make Steve think of it. So there. Haha. Got him.
Got him.
All right. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Magic Erut.
I'm the champion of the oppressed, who is actually the best magician in the DC universe, and they're all just jelly about it.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.
Vodka, bitch.